Imagine opening your home to someone who is broken and trusts you like a sister. You feed her, buy her coffee, sort through her moving boxes, and that person betrays you. She kisses your boyfriend in the kitchen at 3 in the morning while you are at work. When the truth comes out, neighbors whisper, friends pretend nothing happened, and your mother calls to advise you not to make a scene. I could have done anything, but I chose something else. I took my belongings and simply disappeared. This story is about why silence can be stronger than a scandal, how to build dignity after betrayal, and how happiness, not revenge, becomes the best answer. When he first told me I was too kind at the start of our relationship, I laughed and thought it was a compliment he didn't know how to express. We lived in a small, second-floor apartment in an old suburban house. I worked at a small marketing agency, and he was at a startup that promised to be the next big hit. We loved late Sunday walks, brewed coffee together in a cheap French press, split pizzas, watched low-budget comedies, and talked about our future plans. We had our own private jokes and little rituals. I usually made his favorite breakfast if he stayed late at work. He never passed my old t-shirts without wiping away the coffee stains. That summer, Lana, my college dorm neighbor with whom I'd long lost touch, entered our lives. She called me at 4 in the morning after her breakup. Her voice trembled in the receiver, her words were tangled, and she was crying as if she'd been saving up the last minutes of her despair. Her heart was broken, her clothes were on the floor, and her phone was smashed. I remember standing in the doorway of my apartment, looking at her face. It was pale and crumpled from tears, as if all her exhaustion had spilled out. Without a second thought, I opened the door. We offered her the couch for a few weeks. Until I find a place to stay, she said with faint hope, and I believed her. I cooked her soup, pressed on her pain when necessary, and listened to her bitter stories about the relationship that had ended. We sat together in the kitchen, drinking tea and weeping. He was cautious at first, then welcoming. He came home with groceries, helped her find a job through his contacts, and offered advice. He was polite to her, just as he was to me, warmly, with a smile. I saw nothing suspicious in this. He was always like that with people. Then I started noticing small things. His phone would sometimes ring at night, and he would quietly slip into the hallway, not like before, when he'd just answer a work email. His voice was brief, as if he were trying not to say too much. Lana wore his shirts and laughed at his jokes just as I walked into the room, but I explained it away as gratitude for our kindness. Once, I stepped out of the shower and found her earring on the floor near his side of the bed. I put it in a bean jar and forgot about it. Just a bit of mess, I thought. The suspicions slowly smoldered like ashes. The scary part is that ashes scatter if you don't pick them up. I tried to listen to myself, but love has a private voice of doubt. It tells you that you're making things up, that you're vulnerable, that you're being dramatic. We talked about the future, about buying a sofa, about a trip to New York, and those plans felt so real that the suspicions seemed like a ghost. Until the night that changed everything. I came home late from work. He had gone out for a night shift or a meeting with investors. I didn't ask. The apartment was quiet, and the hallway smelled of the ginger tea I always drank when I was sick. Opening the door, I heard a slight noise from our bedroom. My first impulse was to think he'd forgotten his key or that someone had hurt her. I crept closer and saw them, Lana and him on his side of the bed, in the semi-darkness, like a scene from a foreign and scrupulous movie. The whole story unfolded in an instant. The world I had so carefully built crumbled. My heart began to pound like a panic attack, but instead of screaming, I just stood in the doorway. Their faces were shadowed, their bodies too close. He looked up as the door shut behind me. It felt like I was falling through a column of water, slower and more painfully with every moment. I wanted to tear them apart, make a scene, post photos on all social media, set fire to their memories and careers. I wanted everyone to see it and curse them. So many hurtful words rushed into my head that my chest felt filled with stones. But instead of screaming, I looked away. I grabbed the first bag from under the sink, threw a few things in, a couple of my favorite t-shirts, the bag he gave me for our anniversary, my passport, my bank cards, and quietly left. I didn't take anything dramatic, just what could fit in a small backpack. I left a note on the table. I've left. Don't call. I never thought I was capable of such words. They seemed hysterical to me, but then they were a clean, necessary exit. I didn't tell him to get lost, I didn't smash dishes, and I didn't call his mother. I just left. Silence was my answer. It sounded like footsteps on wet leaves, like switching off the loud noise we had long considered, our music. I got on the first bus to the city center, and the night didn't want to release the feeling of emptiness. The days after my escape were strange, like walking through a foreign city in your socks. I found a small room with a friend who agreed to take me in for a few weeks. I went to a therapist the first time in my life, and it felt like unpacking heavy burdens. I started writing. I worked. I slept little. Sometimes I cried out loud, sometimes I laughed when I saw an ad for a comedy show. My family found out through a mutual acquaintance. My mother was in shock. My father was silent for a few days, and my sister wrote 5,000 messages with advice and doubts. Why didn't you tell everyone? My friends asked. Why didn't you make a mockery of him? Some said. I answered these questions with just one statement, because I wanted to save myself. Revenge is a scream that pulls you back into the past. I took the time not to be anyone's revenge project, but myself. This required a different kind of courage, slow, barely noticeable. I learned not to depend on the opinions of others. I learned to put myself first without guilt. I learned to accept compliments again, not as suspicion, but as acceptance. A year passed, and in that year, I had small but important victories. I applied for a new company and got a job that felt like a challenge and a gift at the same time. I moved to a different part of the city, took my small backpack, and put it in the closet as a testament that I wanted more. I started morning runs, slowly and surely. I learned to make a salad without a recipe, because it was my small domestic art. I saw a therapist and began to understand what boundaries I needed in relationships. I met people who respected me and those who only pretended to. I tested myself in new situations and realized there was another type of strength, not noisy, but daily. And then something I didn't expect happened, a new relationship. No, it wasn't a Hollywood romance with lavish evenings. It was a slow process of getting to know a person who listened like no one before and who could share both silence and laughter. Michael, was an engineer who worked nearby, and we met on our morning runs. He didn't have a dramatic past, wasn't the great love of my life. He was the one who showed up when he promised and left when he said, "See you tomorrow." We built trust slowly, cooking dinner together, discussing books neither of us had finished. I didn't rush to open my heart, I allowed myself to heal. 10 months after my departure, Michael invited me for a walk in the rain. We stood under a small market awning, and he pulled out a box. "You made me a better person," he said as I looked into his eyes. A week later, we discussed our engagement, quietly, without fanfare, just as we did everything. It was easy with him, and that was the most important thing. Then one evening, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. We had just finished dinner and had plans for Sunday. Fear constricted my heart as if that same night had returned. I walked to the window and saw him, with the face I still remembered, but which now seemed foreign to me. He stood at a distance, holding a box of flowers and something else, a piece of paper or a small box. There was sorrow in his eyes, red from crying. Beside him stood Lana. She was thinner. Her face was different, either tired or remorseful, I couldn't tell. My heart tightened, but not from pain, from how strange the scene looked. They knocked. I opened the door. For the first time in his life, he felt his knees right by the threshold under my scent, the smell of the rolls I had baked that evening. "I made a mistake," he began, and his voice held as much despair as Lana's had on the phone all those months ago. "I ruined everything. I ask for your forgiveness. I didn't know you would leave. I understand if you hate me." He was crying, and I was listening. There was silence around us, not the loud, screaming kind, but a quiet, cold one that filled the corners of my home. A neighbor looked through the window. Someone probably already heard the rumors. I realized many people would stage a scene, public humiliation, yelling, dramatic outbursts for a hashtag-filled feed. But I had a different answer, one that came from peace and experience. I wouldn't let him pull me back into that past. I stood up and looked him in the eyes. "You're asking for forgiveness?" I asked evenly. He nodded, his lips trembling. I inhaled deeply. "I don't owe you an answer. I am not your property. And nothing you say will bring back those weeks I cried in an empty kitchen. But you know what? I'm living. And I will continue to live." His face twisted with loss. I felt a fortification grow inside me, not a stone wall, but a calm, cold barrier. I didn't let him test me again. I explained that forgiveness is not an action that can be negotiated from your knees. To forgive is for me, not for you. If I ever give you a sign to be part of my life somehow, that will be my decision, under my rules. But right now, I am marrying a man who respects me, and I am not going to break under the pressure of your repentance. He cried and asked for advice, as if I should give him a recipe for redemption. I answered without a recipe. Learn from this. Study. Change, but not to get me back. Change for yourself. A few minutes passed. Lana stood nearby, her eyes filled with something that resembled bitterness. She pressed her palms to her chest and quietly whispered, I am truly sorry. It was an unpleasant sight. Two people who came with pleas they didn't deserve. I experienced the situation as a finished theater scene where I was the audience, not a participant. I closed the door on them. I breathed in. I looked at Michael. He was holding my hand and wasn't asking what I wanted. He was just present. The silence after the ex's departure was soft, like a blanket. I allowed myself a few minutes to feel the victory without the joy of revenge, because it wasn't revenge, it was restoration. This story is not about me being a saint or that revenge is always bad. It's about a choice that gave me freedom. When it was difficult, I could have chosen anger and screaming, and maybe that choice would have given me momentary relief. But I chose a different path, a calm, silent one that demanded strength not from the outside, but from within. The silence I chose wasn't heartless, it was deliberate. It allowed me to rebuild myself, without noise, without prying eyes. It gave me space to grow. If anyone is listening to this and feeling pain, remember, you are not obligated to make choices to deliver justice to other people. Your justice is in your life, in your peace. Reclaim your routine, the small habits that remind you that you are a person, not a story for discussion. Do not allow your dignity to become dependent on the reactions of those who caused you pain. Often, the strongest response is not a desperate outcry, but the quiet, confident life of genuine happiness. As Michael and I walked down the street after our engagement dinner, the leaves fluttered nearby, and I thought about the year that had passed. I thought about how little it takes to feel alive again. Morning coffee, a phone without anxious calls, a friend who brings a blanket when it's cold. And I knew that step by step, I would be wiser, gentler with myself, and even stronger. Because true strength is listening to your heart and then acting in a way that leaves you with no regrets.